I don't know that I have a favourite sound. There are things that I'm more drawn to. But what I'm particularly fascinated by are sounds or perspectives of sound that we otherwise wouldn't hear.
Right, quiet on the set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Roll call.
Hi, and welcome to the Roll Call podcast, where every 2 weeks we invite a different guest from distinct professions within the creative industries to talk about their role and share with us their experiences of working in film and media. I'm your host, D.S. Goremans, but you can call me Darren. The Roll Call's objective is to shine a light upon some of the lesser known roles within the creative industries and give practitioners working within the field a platform to share their knowledge with those of us just starting out in our own careers. Over the past few weeks, we have had the pleasure of talking with industry professionals, Lewis Wardrop and Laura Dixon, both of whom have reiterated the importance of making connections within the industry early, and above all else being persistent, looking for opportunities to learn, to grow, and to thrive. The creative industries can be competitive and hard to break into without a sense of grounded confidence in being what we want to be, and more importantly, being true to ourselves as creators. Sometimes the work we do can change us. These changes can be for the better. When we learn and grow, we become more able to push ahead with our careers with confidence in what we're doing. But sometimes the people around us can make us try too hard to be what people want us to be, rather than being who we really are. That's why all of us on the production team here at the Roll Call feel passionate about what we are doing. In shining a light on the lesser known roles within the creative industries, we truly hope to inform and inspire our listeners to find not only their way into the creative industries, but into the role that is truly right for them. Joining us today to talk more about the importance of persistence and finding the right role for you is sound engineer and composer Paul James.
Hi, Darren.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first became a sound engineer and composer?
Sure. So my name is Paul James. I was born Paul Syme, but recently I've been putting out music under Paul James. And I also make sample instruments under the name Sonidos Atzerados, or Treasured Sounds. I started sound engineering quite some time ago, doing assistant engineering in a studio for a friend. And it began as just seeing if it was something that I enjoyed doing. And I think by the time I had gotten home that day, I decided that was something I wanted to do forever. It's not always been the same work that I do, but it's always with sound as the focus.
Tell us a little bit more then about sort of, those connections that got you into the studio in the first place. How did that come about?
So in my teens, I played guitar, and I had been working with a great teacher who was also a songwriter and producer in his own right. And as well as learning musicianship from him, he also invited me to his home studio to record and sort of participate in that process. So a wonderful now friend called Micah Gilbert, who originated in Athens, Georgia, in the United States, and is now based up on the Isle of Skye. So yeah, he was really instrumental in providing me opportunities that I had otherwise not had up until that point, showing me that music or sound engineering was something that I could do. The place that I grew up, I didn't believe that was ever really an option. It was certainly nothing that I had seen any of my friends or my family doing, and so he was the first person that really showed me that there could be something, other than what I grew up thinking.
And you mentioned that sort of like after that kind of first session, being in Micah's studio, working with him, you kind of felt like that was the thing you wanted to do forever. What was it that kind of, drew you to that made you think this is the thing for me?
I used to always think it was to do with me wanting to be a musician or wanting to have the spotlight. I did try, I must admit, I persisted, but I'm much, much more comfortable behind the microphone or behind the stage. I think I have a lot more fun, and I still believe it's a very creative role, but it's just not with a spotlight shining on you.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I learned is that being in the room is really interesting. Witnessing people doing their professional thing and seeing them creating moments of magic, that was something that I had never experienced, and I very rarely experience outside of that type of work. But that really inspired me to keep trying to be in the room. I think that's all I ever do is I'm trying to be in the room with people doing brilliant things, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about being a sound engineer is we have a different set of skills, but we can be in the room with some wonderful talent, and and the wonderful thing is we get to perhaps take what they already do and perhaps improve on it if that's at all possible. But just being there for me was, I think that was all I wanted to do.
And obviously that was kind of like the early days of your kind of career moving more into sound engineering. But I know that a big part of what you do is making music as well. Quite recently you released an EP of your own. How did that compare to sort of, from being behind the scenes to sort of being front and center for the first time?
Yeah, it's been really hard. I'm not one for saying, here's my work and you should go check it out. I don't enjoy that process very much. But I have, musical ideas in my head, whether or not they're good or bad, that's, up to other people to think about. But the process was really what kind of inspired me. I think about making things quite often, and sometimes it's just out of necessity. I don't have people to make the ideas in my head, and so this was more about me. How do I get them out? Without musicians, how do I get the music there? So the process was very conceptual. It's using only sample instruments, but triggered from modular synthesis. And I was really trying to juxtapose natural sounds but with very technology-based music.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's successful, I don't know. But it was good fun,
Yeah. And I guess that you're kind of someone that wears many hats because, of course, your sort of experience lies in sound engineering. You are a musician in your own right. But you've also, in the recent past, moved into sort of more compositional work for other people and other projects. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yep. Again, I think it's what do I do with these skills that I've been working on? A lot of my musical sound skill set is crossover. So I did study audio engineering some time ago at UHI Perth, and I also have musical training as well. But I often find that what I do bridges a somewhat gap between those two, practices.
So your work as a composer,
Yeah.
I know because it was actually a project that I was actually quite heavily involved with. A group that I was creating a short film for commissioned you to create a soundtrack to go along with that short film. What did that process look like?
A lot of trying to understand what it was the short film was going to be. So trying to understand the brief as the production team understood it themselves. So I spend as much time trying to figure out what sounds they're likely to expect and what types of things they can, if they have any likes or dislikes. But also trying to make sure that it is stylistically appropriate and not too much of my own tastes, if that is not the intention. So in this particular instance, there was a very clear aesthetic. It was traditionally focused with technology as the forefront. And through several iterations, we determined that technology was to be much more of a focus than the traditional elements. And that's that's really how these processes go, is trying to understand the brief as best as possible, as many iterations as can be done without impeding the creative process. Very often there are multiple things happening simultaneously, so a visual edit may be very, very different. So in this case, I was creating music that was, a picture would be synced to that, but sometimes I work in the obverse, and then that way the music may have to change late in the day dependent on the edit that we get back. So it's very much responsive to the each individual brief and client.
And how does working as a composer compare to producing your own music?
It's very humbling. I think I have to be very mindful of not putting too much of myself into everything. It's very natural to say, hey, look what I can do, but often that's not what the client is asking for. What I consider some of the best or smartest things I've done have just been instantly, we don't really need that or want that. And that's just how creative process works.
Yeah.
It's, a very natural thing. But I think if you can understand that and take that on board really early on, then, you won't be quite so upset if it happens, which it does.
You do a number of things, but how do you go about getting that work in the first place? I mean, you work primarily as a freelancer, so how do you make the connections to get those jobs?
I think I've been very fortunate that I have a good network of people. I'm very selective. I'm very fortunate that I get to be so selective about the work that I do, but I only do what I really, really want to, and not, so I'm not dictated to as much as some people might. That's not an easy position to be in all the time, but it's really important for me to do something that is both interesting and something that I believe I can do a good job in. I don't want to take on something that's not going to be right for the person asking me. But more importantly, if I'm not enjoying it and I don't like it, I think that's probably going to come across in the work, however professional we might intend to be about that.
I think networking is one of the things that we have heard, constantly fed back to us. It's something that build your network early, and don't burn your bridges, and work efficiently with people to try and find those connections.
I think having a good standard of work, being able to complete things on time and on budget, if that's a really big concern, which it normally is.
Yeah.
These kind of things, word of mouth reputation is still a really significant thing, and recommendations personally or professionally are still very important. And it's a cliche for a reason. It's not what you know, but the people that you know that can often lead to good opportunities.
Yeah.
Being responsive to what work is out there, knowing what work you want to do, and being brave enough to get in contact and say, hey, I saw this brief, I would like to pitch for this.
Yeah.
And something that I was speaking with someone else about fairly recently, the idea that necessarily writing to the brief might be too difficult, but you might find that there is something already squirreled away on a hard drive or in your notes somewhere that you may be able to match up to something. So just understanding that we all have creative ideas.
Yep.
that might be shelved at the moment, but they might be the right thing for something around the corner. Being open to opportunity.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, it really is about sort of being in the right place at the right time. But there are times when we kind of have to be a bit more forthcoming and a bit more bold and sort of seek things, those places to work or people to work with. How would you primarily get in contact with people that you haven't necessarily worked with before? Would you kind of go to websites, or are there other places that you might find that information?
I guess it depends. For myself, there's often So lots of forums, lots of like sitting reading things that might not necessarily be the most interesting thing, and then all of a sudden something will mention, oh, there's this. So the last couple of things, I did a commission for music for the National Trust up at Culloden, and then I had pitched for something else that I've forgotten the name of, but that one I didn't get. But the process was seeing something and then just saying, oh, that's something I think I could do really well. And sometimes I guess, it's just about being in the moment and going, yes, I think that would be a great opportunity. What do you do? How do I do that? I don't know, but I think it'd be a great opportunity. And I think that's really important, is recognizing that you might not have all of the skills, but being able to say, okay, I think I've got, 60, 70% of that. The rest of it I should be able to pick up, or I'm confident enough that I could learn it on the fly.
I think that's it. And again, a lot of people say exactly that same thing of sometimes it's just about getting the job in the first place, and the learning kind of comes with, with the experience of doing so.
For me, I spent a lot of time saying when I'm good enough, when I can do this, I'll go out and do that. And I think I've wasted or missed some opportunities, and not with regrets. I have learned from that, but I also feel like upon reflection, there were missed opportunities because I wasn't ready to see that or embrace it in the way that I could have done, good or bad.
Talking about readiness, and then readiness and sort of feeling that need to upskill to learn more. How would you go about, or how have you gone about sort of feeling ready and gaining some of those skills that you felt that you needed?
One of the things that I spent a bit of time is looking at job adverts for things that I didn't believe I was able to apply for. What are the key skills that they're actually asking for? And then I went away and I learned, and it's taken me a few years to get to a place where I'm now comfortable in whatever the last skill set upgrade I was working on. Audio reactive music has been something that's been really interesting to me recently. But it's about looking at opportunities and saying, okay, well, if that job advert was up, a couple of years ago, there might not be any openings now, but what was it they were looking for?
Yep.
What skills do I have now, and what skills could I learn if I put my mind to it? Are there any academic facilities that offer these courses? Further education is, a really, really good idea, because not only you can expose yourself to something, but you get to try out lots of little things, which if you were exclusively working in the industry, I don't know you would get those opportunities.
For those who might not know, what is audio reactive music?
Audio reactive music, in my limited knowledge, is... sorry, I said audio active music, but really it should be audio reactive video, shouldn't it? So, basically taking an input source, whether it is live sound or whether it's an audio recording, and feeding that into a program that I use to do different things to the video. So that could be playing through it at different play rates, or scrubbing through in time, responding to amplitude or something like that. Basically using audio as a way of modulating video.
Having seen some of that, it is very complex sounding, but it's also quite visually quite stunning when it kind of comes together like that.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was going to ask, so some of the skills that you have gained, have they been sort of mostly self-taught, like through sort of, YouTube tutorials, or have you gained more of that insight through active learning, through sort of, courses or educational routes?
Bits of both. So I'm currently working on 4th year of my BA in music. That has given me a lot more practical opportunity to make my own music and focus my sound designy sort of skills into a different way.
I mean, do you have a preference for sort of learning? Do you prefer learning in a more self-directed way through sort of, online resources, or do you prefer educational sort of, based learning?
I like working on my own. I've, through necessity, done that quite a lot in the last little while, and I found that not being reliant on other people, and I don't mean to say that not all people are the same, but not having to be dependent on anyone else means that there are less limitations to what I can achieve, and only for that reason. But I really enjoy working one-on-one with someone who knows what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily have to be one-on-one, but I found that knowledge sharing through the art of doing is very useful, and very much like getting into a job. That's kind of the best way to learn sometimes. Go wrap that cable. How do I do that? Well,
Wrap the cable 100
and
times.
there are ways, yeah. And whatever it is, there are lots of ways of going about that.
So you are primarily a freelancer. You do, a lot of collaborative work with other sort of creative sort of people, actually quite a mix of creative work. But what for you are the benefits of being a freelancer, advantages and maybe some of the disadvantages?
So a lot of the work that I do is kind of lone work. Primarily in the last little while, I've been doing more archive or digitizing old field recordings. And so this is really interesting, but it doesn't require two people. It's just a very time-intensive thing. Getting to work when I can.
Yep.
So I have other commitments, as I'm sure people do, that take precedence over work sometimes. And so being able to pick and choose according to family commitments is really important to me. And the other thing is the variety of work that I get to do. So I mentioned earlier, I'm very fortunate that I get to say, I like this, I want to do more of that particular type of thing. And that's really one of the main advantages of working as a freelancer rather than in one particular situation. There are obvious downsides. Freelance work is few and far between sometimes. Again, being good at what you do and being selective about the right projects, there is longevity in that, but it is sometimes few and far between. So, yeah, uncertainty being a freelancer is a really, big consideration. But I see it more as an opportunity than, I'm trying to be optimistic. There are always opportunities and pitfalls, but I see it as an opportunity. It gives me more chance to work with a wider variety of people, a wider genre selection of music. And also just doing things that I might not have otherwise done. If I went into every situation saying, I'm very good at this, I only want to do that, eventually that work could dry up. But also you might have missed out on potentially the most, enjoyable part of the work you've never done before. Some of the best things I still do, I found my way into just by accident, and I'm very glad I did.
And actually that's an interesting thing, because a lot of the conversations we've had have been about sort of, pursuing sort of that one kind of, ideal, perfect role. But that usually comes back to actually it takes a bit of time to find that. And in the creative industries, you kind of almost have to kind of dip your toe into the water sort of many times in many places before you find that right role. What other things have you done? You mentioned archive work, but, could you tell us a little bit more about what that actually looks like?
Sure. So archiving, the work that I am doing is very much digitizing. Originally, it began as one single project with a very finite amount of work and duration. And I've since worked with that person a number of times, and I think we're now into 10 years at least. This is their lifetime of their own personal work, and yeah, this is now us digitizing this for future audiences. Some of it will be submitted to places like the British Folk Museum,
Yep.
And some of it may even be, added to an archive of their own at some point. But
And what is it that you're actually archiving?
so predominantly audio recordings from different tape machines through different technological ages. So some of it might just be a standard cassette tape, or some of it might be on dictaphone, some of it might be on old Tandberg quarter-inch tape and that sort of thing. There are different machines with different considerations and performance qualities, and also each of the pieces of equipment is in varying states of repair or condition. So some of them could do with a little fixing up, but part of the challenge is trying to take all of these different sources from different periods and on different presentation formats, and making them uniform without detriment to the original recording. And that's the challenging part. Sometimes the work is very intensive, but it's not necessarily intended to be heard or seen. So some of the processes that I do, you would hear a radical difference if you were combining A and B, but very often if someone can hear that I have fixed something, I would consider that I have not fixed it properly, if that makes sense. So yeah, some other archiving work might just be something simple like family video recordings, so not very rock and roll, but still a really important thing to someone, that they would like to hold on to that.
Yeah.
And that's something that I mentioned earlier with the treasured sounds or sonidos atzerados. And that's something that's really important to me, is sound has a story of its own, not necessarily just in musical recordings, but just how we hear things. Think of the Wilhelm scream.
Yep.
How many times have you heard that?
Yep.
It has a very clear and I think quite documented lineage, and where was its original use case and why has it stood the test of time? Why are people not recording their own? Or, so yeah, sometimes it's about preserving something, and sometimes it's about making something accessible to other people. And I think both of those things are very important.
So what is your favorite sound?
I asked my piano tuner friend very much the same thing, if he has a particularly favorite note. I don't know that I have a favorite sound. There are things that I'm more drawn to, but what I'm particularly fascinated by are sounds or perspectives of sound that we otherwise wouldn't hear. So, best example is if we were to take a piano.
Yeah.
Typically the note would have a very strong attack, and then it would die out quite quickly thereafter. Now, if we took the front of that sound and then just got rid of it, you would get something that starts with just a without the percussive element. And taking that and putting it in a different context is a really interesting thing to me. So we get sounds that are understandable because they come from organic sources, but they are also otherworldly because they are a presentation that no one has ever really experienced before. Vibrations of electrical equipment, things that normal people don't listen to. How do things sound through the vibrations of the table?
Yeah, I think it ties into another thing. Again, a person who wears a number of hats, but you make sample instruments, and a lot of the time you are creating new sounds from sort of traditional sounds, or you're changing sounds or manipulating sound to create something new.
Yeah, and that's where sound engineering isn't just pointing microphones. It's got a very, very open-ended title. You know, there are many things that you can do under the umbrella of sound engineering. I think sound design is a fascinating thing. It's a very deep rabbit hole if you want to go down that one.
I guess, kind of thinking a bit more about sort of that breadth of your career, what has been for you the highlight of your career? You know, where have you found the most joy?
The fact that I'm still able to keep doing it and keep learning new things keeps me, that keeps me doing it. The fact that I'll never know everything, there's always something new to learn, there's always a new process to understand, and there's always a better version of myself, and that seems like a really nice thing to strive for. I remember when I was learning music much younger, I thought, you know, when I'm this age, I'll know everything. And I sort of very quickly realized that, you know, and that made me happy, you know, thinking I'll know everything one day. But now it's very much I'll very likely not know anything about anything, and that makes me happy.
And I think that's it. I think a lot of what we do is just sort of like, you know, scratching the surface of, you know, and not quite being able to go as in depth as we want to. Very much like sort of these podcasts. I feel like with every guest we've had in, you know, we have that sort of like we could have talked, you know, for days if we wanted to.
Once everybody gets comfortable, it gets easier too.
I guess one of the biggest questions we ask everyone is, what advice would you give to someone? And again, you know, we have been talking in this series a bit more about sort of film and media, and you've kind of been on sort of the outskirts of that industry without sort of kind of being front and center there. But what advice would you give to someone who wants to enter the industry, or just interested in working in particular maybe with sound in the way that you do?
Do it. You know, start doing something, start doing it regularly, and be really open to working with other people, because they will, you know, as much as I may enjoy working on my own, without other people I wouldn't learn about other perspectives, I wouldn't learn to improve, I wouldn't learn to change my opinion when I need to, and that's a really huge thing.
Yeah.
But go out and just start doing the thing that makes you happy, or the thing that you're passionate about. And if you know nothing about it, try and find out one thing. For me, whenever I'm learning anything, I love to start something, and then at the end of the day, I delete it. And I know that's probably not very helpful, but the next day I have to do it all over again. And if at the end of the week I've done something that many times, there's a chance that I'm going to be slightly better at doing that one thing, and I might have progressed slightly further than I did each day. And I think with all things audio and sound, it's super easy to feel excluded and feel like you don't know where to start, or feel like you're never going to understand what does this do and what does that do. Nobody knows what they're doing. I'm sure that's not true. But I think when we all get started, we're all just playing a really big blagging game. And I think that's really important. If you can do that, I think you'll be okay.
Yep. And again, I think that kind of ties in very well to, you know, the things that people have been saying in the past as well. You know, we do what we do because we love it, because we enjoy it. And I think there has to be that those moments of joy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can think of loads of times where I've played live in various bands, and although I've really enjoyed the process, I don't enjoy playing live as much as I do other parts of creative work. And for me, it's about recognizing what it is that makes me feel something inside of myself and leaning into doing that.
Yeah. Again, I could talk to you all day about this, I'm sure. Unfortunately, we're at a point where we have to wrap up already. But you have just been a wonderful, wonderful guest, Paul, and thank you very much for sharing your insight, be it at that superficial level or not. I feel that we've learned a lot today. So thank you very much for coming in.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the opportunity. Thank you.
But yes, that is all the time that we have for this week's episode. And again, Paul, thank you very, very much for joining us and for sharing your insights and experience. And thank you to our listeners, both new and those of you returning. If you haven't already checked out our Instagram, please do follow us at the Roll Call Podcast to keep up to date with our upcoming episodes. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our future industry guests, please do send them in to us. Until next time.
Okay, that's a wrap.